Hi, everyone. It is May 8th, 2020. I'm Alison Zak, the Education Associate at the Clifton Institute, and I'm here with Dr. David Wilcove, fulfilling my dream of pretending to be a podcast host. Dr. Wilcove, as you know, last month, the Clifton Institute Book Club read your book, No Way Home, The Decline of the World's Great Animal Migrations, and here it is. And we all really enjoyed it. And before we get started, I just want to let the viewers of this video know that the Open Book independent bookstore in Old Town Warrenton still has currently 3 copies of No Way Home available, and also 5 copies of Dr. Wilcove's first book called The Condor's Shadow. And so if you're looking for something to read, the Open Book is doing curbside pickup and local home deliveries if you live in the Warrenton area right now, and the books are there in the bookstore waiting for you. So I just wanted to share that before we get started. So thank you, Dr. Wilcove, for being here to chat with me. We of course planned to do this in person a few months ago, but we're working with what we've got, and we're grateful that all the viewers of this interview can be cozy and safe in their homes, while still, engaging with the community and talking about environmental issues. So I will now properly introduce our guest. Dr. David Wilcove is a professor of ecology, evolutionary biology, and public affairs at Princeton University. And the primary question driving his research is, how do we find room for biodiversity in an increasingly hot, hungry, and crowded world? Such an important question. Accordingly, his work focuses on the impacts of farming, logging, hunting, and other human activities on biodiversity. And he and his graduate students and postdocs have studied these issues around the world, from New Zealand to the Amazon basin and from Siberia to Borneo. Prior to joining Princeton's faculty in 2001, he was a senior scientist for the Environmental Defense Fund, the Wilderness Society, and the Nature Conservancy. He is the author of the 2 books that I've just shown you, and many articles in the fields of conservation biology, ornithology, and wildlife conservation. He received his undergraduate degree from Yale University and his doctorate from Princeton. So, Dr. Wilcove, did I forget anything there?
No, that was a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I can't be there with you at the Clifton Institute for this discussion.
We will make do. So I will kick it off now with the first question. In No Way Home, you wrote about how what is gone is not necessarily the species, but the migration phenomenon, right? So the first question is, what is a migratory species without the phenomenon? Can you even separate those 2 things? And how much of a loss is that if the phenomena is what we lose?
Okay. The point I was trying to get at is there are obviously some migratory species that are completely extinct. The passenger pigeon, we will never see that again. But for most migratory species, it's not that they are extinct, it's that they're becoming much less common. So if we take a little songbird like the Blackburnian warbler, which migrates from its breeding grounds in New England, the Appalachians, and then the boreal forests in Canada, down to wintering grounds in southern Central America and the Andes, there are still plenty of Blackburnian warblers around, but there are certainly not as many of them as there used to be. And I picked that because I happened to see 2 of them this morning in my backyard. So we can accurately describe the Blackburnian warbler as a migratory species, and there are lots of migratory warblers. It's migratory because it breeds in one place, it journeys to another place for the non-breeding season, and then it returns. So it's a round trip voyage. But if we think about it, phenomenon migration in a slightly different way, what was really cool, what still is cool, is when it's not just one Blackburnian warbler, but lots of them, and then lots and lots of other warblers, different species, moving through the forests in the spring or in the fall. That's the migration that the bird watchers get all excited about. And what is happening for species after species around the world is that their numbers are declining, and so that phenomenon of abundance, of large numbers of the migrants moving through, that is diminishing, and in some cases has all but disappeared. And that strikes me as a very significant loss, both ecologically in terms of its impacts on ecosystems where these migrants can play an important role, but also in terms of human well-being, both for the migrants that we depend on, like salmon and things like that, but also for the aesthetic joy that they give us. It's not just a question of seeing one tree swallow in the fall, it's seeing thousands of swallows, or not just one monarch butterfly going to Mexico to winter, but the fact that millions of them do. And part of my reason for writing the book was to really call attention to the fact that migration as a phenomenon of abundance is seriously threatened.
What do you think is so, this wasn't even a question on my sheet, but now that you brought it up, I've been kind of wondering since I read your book about that concept of humans being, what about it of the abundance is so compelling to us as humans? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think there are two components to it. I mean, the first is that the journeys of many of these migratory species are really quite amazing to contemplate. The idea that a monarch butterfly, which is basically a Kleenex, can go from southern Canada to Mexico, or the fact that some little songbird can travel thousands and thousands of miles. So there's that aspect of it. But there's also the fact that seeing so many of these creatures engaged in that journey is really a very evocative, beautiful, and extraordinary experience. You think about seeing either in person if you're lucky, or certainly in David Attenborough films, the migration of wildebeest through the Serengeti, hundreds of thousands of them. You think back to the stories of the great bison herds, again, numbering surely in the tens of thousands, maybe the hundreds of thousands, maybe more, and the Great Plains. And that takes our wonder regarding the journey of an individual creature and then adds to that this remarkable visual experience of so many of them.
Thank you. Yeah, I certainly know that your book has inspired me to seek out an experience of observing a migration event like that. And I love your quote about monarch butterflies being a Kleenex. That's great. So my next question is, No Way Home was published in 2008. And so I'm wondering if since that time there have been any new discoveries or any recent research that kind of adds to the story of the species that you were writing about.
There was a paper that came out, I think, last year that was led by scientists at the Laboratory of Ornithology that tabulated the decline of migratory birds in North America since, I think, about 1970, and revealed a strikingly large decline on the order of a third or more have disappeared, and that justifiably attracted a lot of attention. Similarly, we've seen stories this year that the migration of the western monarch butterflies, the ones that are to the west of the Rocky Mountains and that used to go to the coast of southern and central California, are down from millions a couple of decades ago to low tens of thousands now, a really striking and alarming decline. So there have been, unfortunately, a number of studies that have come out documenting the further declines of really some of the most well-known and cherished animal migrations on the planet.
All right. You also wrote about how certain aspects of our understanding of migratory species or their migration phenomena are still a complete mystery to us in some ways. So my question is, if you had no limitations or restrictions for time, funding, travel, any of that, what do you not know yet that you would like to find out?
Sure. So it varies somewhat with the different types of animals that we're talking about. But if you take, for example, the case of all of these songbirds, these migratory songbirds that bird watchers around the world look forward to seeing in their respective springs and falls, we often know where they breed. We often have a very good idea where they winter, but exactly where they stop over, how long they fly in a given night, the types of habitats they're picking or not picking as they come down to rest and refuel during their journeys, that's completely up in the air for many of these species. So with the advent of satellite telemetry and things like that, with enough money, with some further technological advances to reduce the sizes of the transmitters, we ought to be able to attach lots of them to these birds and solve that mystery in many different parts of the world. Or to give you another example, in many places, you can see tremendous migrations of dragonflies and hoverflies. And we really don't know where they're going and why exactly they're migrating. There's some compelling hypotheses, but that's a whole spectrum of migration that is really understudied, largely because of the technological limitations. Mm-hmm. So that would be another area where we could make advances. And then there are cases where even when we think we know about the migration of the animals, say some of the Creek antelope or in the United States, pronghorn, you start putting satellite collars on them and you discover that they're traveling much farther than you thought, or they're taking routes that you didn't expect them to take. So in almost every realm of the sky, the sea, the land, you can identify migratory animals that are real mysteries to us for at least some phases of their journeys.
Great. So it sounds like you still have a lot left to explore.
Yeah, the field is far from settled, that's for
sure. I do love a little bit of mystery though, so there's a good balance there. So you've also been involved in the study of some plant movement. Is that true?
Plants?
Like invasive species?
Yes, we've done some work on that, but of course, that's a unidirectional movement. That's a colonization of an area. And one of the questions we were interested in is, as the climate changes, what some of these noxious weeds and things, what's going to happen to them? Are they going to expand into new areas? Are they going to contract from some of the areas where they currently occur? And if they're going to disappear from some areas, what plants might move in to take their place? And we found that the answer is all of the above. That is, some of these species in some parts of the range, they're going to contract, they're going to disappear, and that's going to create openings. Maybe the native plants will come in, but maybe some non-native plants will. In other cases, we have invasive plants that are probably going to be able to invade new areas, places where they heretofore haven't been able to establish populations because the climate was unsuitable. Now, there's an interesting connection to animal migration in that you wonder how these plants will affect the species in the new areas they go to and what that means for the migratory animals that may use the native vegetation.
Mm-hmm. you connected it all together without me even asking that. So that's great. Thank you. So this is a little bit of a different question. Being an expert in your field, what was it like to write a popular science book compared to writing, more scholarly articles? For example, how was it to follow other researchers and write about their work instead of your own?
So I would begin by saying that I had certainly spent many years studying migratory birds. In fact, that was a topic I began studying when I did my dissertation decades ago. But I didn't know an awful lot about the other types of animal migration. And writing the book was one way of forcing myself to learn about them. And it was never a question in my mind that I was going to write a book that would be hopefully of interest to more than the biologists who study animal migration, because we really need to communicate to a much larger audience. It's that larger audience that's going to ultimately affect the policies in place that determine whether these animal migrations prosper or dwindle. And in the process of researching the book, I did have the chance to go out and meet with people studying all sorts of migratory animals, whales, African antelope, insects. And that was really one of the highlights of the project, the chance to learn from them, to see how they go about tackling these very challenging questions with the animals that they like to study.
Great. Yeah, if you haven't read No Way Home yet, the other species that we haven't talked about yet that are highlighted in the book are sea turtles, bison, you mentioned, salmon, no, yes, salmon, monarchs. I'm flipping through my book here. Grasshoppers. I think that's all of them.
And
right?
whales.
And whales, yes, you mentioned whales. Okay, this final question, it came from multiple of our book club readers, and I'm sure it's on anyone's mind as they finish reading your book. And you do kind of address it in the final chapter, but again, since some time has passed since publication, I'll ask, do you still have hope for conserving these migratory species and phenomena? And if so, what can individuals do who read your book and want to do something to help? How can an individual make an impact?
I've never lost hope on any of these issues that I work on. And the reason for that is twofold. First, from a very practical viewpoint, once you lose hope, the game is over. You're not going to work to prevent the outcome that you don't want to see happen. But the second, and I think in some ways the more substantive, is that you do see progress. You do see people making really significant efforts to save migratory species. And so there was a time when sea turtles were disappearing by the tens of thousands caught in fishing nets as bycatch. And in the United States, there was a long, drawn-out, contentious battle to get the fishermen to use devices attached to their nets that would allow the turtles to escape the nets and avoid drowning. And they fought it fiercely, but eventually they were forced to do it, and it greatly reduced sea turtle mortality. Same time, I talked about that very alarming report showing the tremendous number of declines of migratory birds, but you do see cooperative ventures and actions at federal, state, and local levels to try to restore habitats for migratory birds, to try to gain a better sense of how their populations are doing, where they're traveling to. So there's always activity out there that is directed towards saving those species. And I think that's a really encouraging thing. In terms of what an individual can do, I view this as a combination of local and national activities. At the local level, you certainly can make your own property more hospitable to the migratory animals that pass through that in terms of what you plant, whether you use harmful chemicals or not, that sort of thing. Within your community, you can play a role in supporting local conservation initiatives. And then, since migratory animals cross all sorts of borders and boundaries that are meaningless to them, but hugely important to humans, it's important that at the national and international level, people are working together to conserve migratory species. And that requires all of us to be responsible citizens, to basically get out there and vote and put into elective office the people who are going to care about the environment. And at the same time, when you are aligned with thoughtful conservation organizations, getting guidance from them as to when's the right time to send a letter, call a congressional office, that sort of thing. And that's really important as well.
Very important. I agree. I will put a plug here. In about an hour and a half, of course, this isn't live for the viewers, but our executive director at the Clifton Institute, Bert Harris, is going to be talking about grassland restoration. So if you're a landowner who's interested in that, you can email me. Again, I'm Allison. You can go to the Clifton Institute website, and Bert's talk will be up on our YouTube channel as well if you're interested in that.
And I know that Clifton is working very hard to restore habitats for a variety of migratory animals, including things like American kestrels, grasshopper sparrows, things like that. And it's tremendous work.
Is there anything else, Dr. Wilcove, that you would like to add that we haven't talked about yet before we end our conversation?
Alison, the only thing I would add is to encourage people to go out and enjoy the migration, particularly in the spring when so many animals are on the move, but really at any time of year, somewhere, someplace, animals are on the move, and it is always a marvelous phenomenon to witness.
That is the perfect ending. And I will jump on that and say that tomorrow, May 9th, which this talk will be up and available to people by then, it's Global Big Day for the birders. It's also World Migratory Bird Day. So I don't know the details of what those events are, but it sounds like the perfect motivation to get outside, get some fresh air, and watch some birds. So thank you again, Dr. Wilcove, for chatting with me. I'll remind everyone one more time that both of Dr. Wilcove's books are available at the Open Book in Warrenton. And thank you all for watching. Thank you, Dr. Wilcove. I hope that we are able to meet in person at some point.
I hope so too. I look forward to it. And my gratitude to you and your colleagues at Clifton for all that you've done on behalf of the environment.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too.